Welcome to the deep dive. Right now, we're plunging into the world of real estate, specifically looking at a market that, well, it always seems to be in the news, Phuket. And the big question, really, the one posed right in the source material we're digging into today is Phuket heading for a bright future, or are there maybe some storm clouds gathering? So our source is an article called Phuket Real Estate, Bright Future or Storm Clouds. It's from Ocean Worldwide. Now, just so
Yeah.
you know, Ocean Worldwide is a luxury real estate agency. They've actually been based in Phuket. And quick note, we'll be using the local pronunciation Phuket, not Phuket. Yeah, based there since 2004.
Wow, since 2004, so they've seen a few cycles.
Exactly. They specialize in luxury homes there in Phuket and also Koh Samui. And this piece, it's written by Galifade Etienne, who handles their marketing.
And it's definitely a market that gets people talking, isn't it? You hear these
Yeah.
like really strong opinions, massive growth, potential bubble, all of that. So our job today, I think, diving into this article, is to see what they say, what the source itself tells us about the dynamics. What's the evidence they present for the real story here?
Yeah, exactly. It feels like we need to cut through some of the chatter and just look at their perspective, their data. So we'll unpack the positives they see, the challenges they flag, touch on the history they mention, and, try to figure out what it all means if you're interested in this market.
And the article is, well, it's quite balanced, which is good. It sets up that core tension right away. Acknowledges the strong growth, the resilience over time, but also points to potential issues like oversupply or external economic risks. You really have to look at both sides.
Okay, let's get into it then. The article kicks off calling it a hot topic. So what's the immediate takeaway? What are the key headlines they want us to get right from the start about the Phuket market?
Right, okay. So the author lists 5 key things pretty much immediately.
Yeah.
First, they stress the market's basic strength, its resilience, its growth, even when things have been tough globally. Second, yeah, they admit there have been slowdowns, but the pattern is recovery. That's key.
Right.
Third, a bit of caution, potential oversupply in some areas, which, could mean prices adjusting or sales slowing down a bit. Fourth, they really hammer home that Phuket's fundamental appeal is still super high for tourists, for residents, even with crowding concerns in places.
Okay.
And fifth, they hint that new investment spots are opening up nearby, offering maybe a different kind of experience. So right from the beginning, it's painted as complex, not just good or bad.
Got it. Complex history of bouncing back, but maybe some bumps right now.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with the positives then. According to this article, what's really driving the bright side of the Phuket property outlook?
Well, sustained demand is a big one they point to. They've apparently seen demand for homes, residential properties, increase steadily over recent years.
Hmm.
And interestingly, it's not just holiday places. They're seeing more and more people wanting to make Phuket their actual permanent home. That kind of shift towards year-round living, that's
Yeah.
a powerful driver.
Yeah, that makes sense. More stable demand.
Exactly. Then there's property value appreciation. That's another big positive highlighted. If you own property there, chances are it's gone up in value, maybe quite a bit.
Yeah.
The article sees this as a sign of health, fueled by that demand we mentioned.
But they add a caveat, right?
They do, a crucial one, that the pace of appreciation needs watching. You don't want it to get out of hand and create that classic boom and bust situation.
Sustainable growth.
Precisely. And maybe the most compelling positive, something they really emphasize, is Phuket's resilience against economic downturns. They talk about its track record, how it recovers from big global shocks, local issues. This history, it builds investor confidence for the long haul. It's seen as a place that really can, weather the storm.
That resilience point is interesting. But like you said, markets go up and down. The article talks about understanding these cycles in Phuket. What kind of ups and downs has it actually seen?
Yeah, it gets specific about historical market slowdowns.
Yeah.
Mentions times when prices basically just went flat. Often that was when new building, the supply, kind of got ahead of the number of buyers.
Okay.
They mentioned the recovery after the 2004 tsunami took time, and the 2008 global crisis definitely put a damper on things. But the main takeaway they stress is how it consistently bounces back afterward. And interestingly, they even suggest these slower times can actually be buying opportunities for savvy investors.
Ah, the contrarian view.
Sort of, yeah. And it all boils down to basic supply and demand dynamics. It's, strained economics, more buyers than homes. Prices tend to rise. More homes than buyers. Prices might stagnate or even dip.
Makes sense.
They explain supply is affected by new developments, building costs, things like that. Demand is driven by tourism, expats moving in, the general economy. When those two get out of sync, that's when you see a correction.
So, how do you predict where it's going? What indicators do they say to watch?
Well, they advise keeping a close eye on tourism numbers, obviously. Economic growth, both global trends and specifically what's happening in Thailand, and the amount of new building activity. But they also say you need to look broader at things like global trade wars or general projected economic growth rates. These big external factors can really sway real estate investment returns.
Right, it's all connected. Okay, so if supply does get ahead of demand, which they flagged as a risk, that brings us to oversupply. What happens then, according to the article?
Well, oversupply basically puts buyers in the driver's seat. The article says it typically leads to price adjustments and slower sales. Developers get more competitive to shift their stock.
Meaning discounts.
Yeah, exactly. Things like discounts, maybe they throw in a furniture package or offer guaranteed rent for a while. And sometimes, the article says, they just straight up reduce prices. It's a clear sign the market's cooling off, but like we said, it can also mean deals for buyers who are ready.
And what about new building? Does that slow down too?
Usually, yes. The article expects a slowdown in new development if sales become tough. Developers might hit pause on new projects if the market can't absorb what's already there. Now, while that slows things down overall, the source actually suggests this can be a good thing in the long run
How so?
because it helps bring supply and demand back into balance, leads to more stability later on. They mention that developers watch those projected economic growth rates closely when making these decisions.
Okay.
And it's worth remembering, the article stresses this, market corrections are just a normal part of any real estate cycle. They might feel worrying, but they're presented as times that can offer opportunities for savvy investors who are playing the long game.
So, cycles, potential corrections, but underlying it all, the article really pushes Phuket's lasting appeal. Why does it have this Teflon reputation almost?
Teflon is a good way to put it. They call it a resilient investment destination. This seems to stem from its huge global popularity as a tourist spot, plus its draw for expats and locals seeking that quality of life. They also point out its diverse economy. It's not just tourism helps it weather the storm better than some other places.
And there's history there too.
Definitely. A clear history of historical growth in value and volume going back to around 2005. Even with massive hits like the tsunami or COVID, the overall trend for prices and, importantly, the number of sales has been upward. That volume shows healthy demand over time.
Right.
And that ability to bounce back from global crises, it's a recurring theme. They attribute this resilience partly to the community spirit, the adaptability on the island, but fundamentally it comes back to how desirable Phuket is, the lifestyle, the beauty. That helps demand snap back relatively quickly. Now, they're careful past performance doesn't guarantee future results, obviously.
Of course.
But that track record does suggest potential for long-term returns.
Okay, but the article isn't all sunshine, is it? It tackles some common criticisms, the perceived market challenges. What specific issues does it address?
Yeah, it's quite upfront. Concerns over traffic and over tourism, they acknowledge that, especially in hotspots like Patong. Getting around can be tough sometimes.
We've all heard that.
Right. But it also points out the local government is trying to address it. Road improvements, looking at public transport, trying to spread tourism out more evenly across the island. The message is kind of, yes, it's an issue, but infrastructure is slowly adapting.
And what about tourism itself, its impact?
The impact of international visitor trends is huge, obviously. Tourism is called the island's lifeblood. So any dip, any change in where visitors are coming from, it sends ripples. But again, the source comes back to Phuket has always bounced back.
Why? What makes it bounce back?
Mainly its strong global brand and that lifestyle appeal. Plus, they note it's attracting a wider range of people now. Not just traditional tourists. You've got digital nomads staying longer, high net worth folks buying luxury villas, people interested in ecotourism. This diversity helps cushion the impact if one particular visitor group declines.
Interesting diversification.
And they frame these setbacks as having a short-lived nature. Despite huge events like tsunamis or political wobbles, the argument is Phuket historically demonstrated resilience bouncing back. The core attraction, island life, constant improvements, makes these problems temporary, they argue, and might even strengthen its appeal long-term. They kind of suggest looking at that bigger picture.
So thinking about the island itself, how is it actually changing on the ground for people living there or visiting often? What's this evolving landscape look like?
Well, there's been massive infrastructure development over the last couple of decades. Roads, utilities, services, big improvements across the board. And with more people coming, this expansion is seen as unlikely to slow down. It's
Yeah.
basically needed to keep up.
But the traffic.
Ah, yes, the traffic. They admit, if you knew Phuket over a decade ago, the change is striking. Drives take longer now, especially peak times. But they offer some perspective. For many new visitors, maybe compared to back home, the current setup is still seen as a major upgrade. It's that mix, tropical beauty plus developing infrastructure that keeps attracting people globally.
And the appeal to new visitors is still strong then.
Very strong, according to the article. New visitors focus on what's on offer now, the relaxation, entertainment, culture, beaches. And Phuket seems good at adapting to evolving preferences, food, nightlife, activities, which keeps it popular. They also specifically mention younger Thais choosing to live in luxury villas or condos there now, adding another layer to demand.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. The article also looks at the wider economic picture affecting Phuket. What are those bigger external factors?
Global trade wars and their effects get a mention. Higher tariffs, trade tensions, these hurt businesses globally, impact profits, wages, and eventually people's ability or confidence to buy property.
Yeah.
It's all interconnected.
Right, ripple effects.
Then there are projected economic growth rates. Important indicators, though, as they note, not always perfectly reliable. Thailand's overall growth is forecast to slow a bit from maybe 4.5% down to 3.2%. A general slowdown like that can dampen foreign investment and just overall market sentiment across the country, including Phuket.
And there was a domestic concern, too.
Yes, a big one.
Yeah.
Risks of bank credit and defaults. Thai household debt is really high, around 85% of GDP. The worry expressed in the article is that an economic slowdown could lead to more defaults on loans,
Which means?
which means banks might tighten lending, make it harder to get mortgages. That cools the property market further. They call it a potential vicious cycle. They also briefly mention how things like post-2008 quantitative easing in the U.S. poured money into global assets, including property, sort of setting the stage for some current conditions.
So if you pull those economic threads together, the article points to some broader structural challenges for Thai real estate in general.
It does. It talks about interconnected economic risks.
Yeah.
You've got slower national growth reducing foreign investment. You've got trade tariffs hitting company revenues. All these pressures combine and feed back into the property market, potentially affecting values, even for, say, a nice 3-bedroom pool villa.
And this leads to a warning.
A pretty stark one, yeah.
Yeah.
The article mentions a potential for value correction, citing some experts suggesting a possible 20–30% drop in Thai property values by mid-2026 if these trends continue. It's framed as a serious warning that makes the market feel vulnerable.
Wow, 20–30% is significant.
It is. And they see factors like trade tariffs and that high household debt combining to create a potential perfect storm. The takeaway is definitely caution and careful planning are needed right now.
Okay, given this whole picture, the resilience, the history, but also these really significant current warnings, what's the implicit advice for investors looking at Phuket now?
The vibe is definitely a cautionary outlook. Acknowledge the appeal, yes, acknowledge the history, but really pay attention to the headwinds and the potential for corrections. Prudence over optimism is the message.
And what does prudence look like in practice?
Well, diversifying investments, don't put everything in one place. Doing your homework, really research specific areas, specific properties, and crucially, get professional advice from local experts, people who really understand the Phuket market on the ground.
Makes sense.
The article basically says, look, it's better to miss out on a potential gain than to suffer a significant loss. Focus on preserving capital, make informed decisions based on facts, not just excitement.
And managing those external factors.
Right. Navigating external vulnerabilities is key. Keep an eye on things like global trade issues. They mentioned U.S. tariff hikes as an example. Watch tourism trends, changes in the Thai economy overall. You need to be aware of these wider risks and be ready to adjust your strategy.
So if Phuket itself feels maybe too risky or just too crowded for some, does the article suggest alternatives within Thailand?
It does. It mentions investors looking at alternative coastal destinations. Places offering similar beauty, that coastal lifestyle, but maybe less congestion, potentially lower prices, a more relaxed atmosphere.
Like where specifically?
Khao Lak and Koh Lanta get mentioned as examples, areas with some existing development but also room to grow.
Okay.
And the northern Andaman coast is highlighted as particularly interesting. Pristine beaches, lush scenery, slower pace, generally lower property costs than Phuket. Attractive for value seekers or those wanting quiet.
And what's driving interest there?
A big factor is planned new airport and infrastructure development. A new airport significantly boosts accessibility, right? That usually leads to more tourism, more demand, rising property values, plus other improvements like roads, utilities. It's
Hmm.
about unlocking that area's potential as a real alternative.
Yeah.
The benefits they list are lower prices, quieter beaches, potential for good capital growth, and yeah, that quieter lifestyle.
And what about expats already in Phuket or people thinking of moving? Are their preferences changing too?
Yes, the article points to a noticeable shift. Some expats are now actively seeking a quieter lifestyle, moving away from the really busy tourist zones. This is driving demand in less developed areas of Phuket itself. People want a slower pace, less traffic, maybe more community feel.
So where is he moving?
Towards the north and east of the island, mainly. These areas offer a more, maybe, authentic Thai vibe, quieter beaches, often better prices. The article notes that even luxury options, like exclusive sea view pool villas, are sought after in these quieter spots away from the main crowds.
But can they still get to things they need? Schools, hospitals?
That's the key point. Because the island's overall infrastructure has improved, residents in these quieter areas still have decent accessibility to Phuket amenities. Good roads make it easier to reach international schools, hospitals, shopping malls when needed. So you get the best of both worlds, peace and quiet at home, but convenience is still there. This shift in expat needs, the article notes, will likely shape where developers build next. Places like Bang Tao, Leh Gad, Naithon are mentioned as popular relocation spots.
Okay, so after covering all that ground, the ups, the downs, the alternatives, the shifts, how does the article finally sum up where the Phuket property market stands? What's the final word?
The author wraps it up by saying it's clearly been a mixed bag historically. Good times, but also serious bumps like the tsunami, the health crisis. But that core theme returns. Phuket always seems to bounce back.
Despite the current worries.
Yeah. They acknowledge the current chatter about oversupply, traffic. But the author expresses this kind of faith that Phuket has a way of sorting itself out. Confidence in its adaptability, I suppose.
And the outlook now?
The final take is that the island's global appeal is still strong, and that keeps the market fundamentally ticking over. Smaller developers might struggle a bit now, but bigger players are apparently ready. The immediate prediction is maybe a few quiet months ahead, bit of a plateau perhaps. But the final advice is pretty clear. Don't expect a huge crash. The story, they say, is far from over.
Wow. Okay. So we've really unpacked this perspective from Ocean Worldwide, luxury specialists in Phuket and Koh Samui since 2004. It paints this picture of a market with just incredible historical resilience, but facing some very real interconnected challenges right now.
Right. The source really makes the case for Phuket's fundamental desirability, its almost uncanny ability to weather storms, and the fact that demand is still there, driven by lifestyle and, evolving visitor and resident types, digital nomads, luxury villa buyers, Thai nationals moving there.
But it definitely doesn't sugarcoat the risks, that potential for oversupply, price adjustments, the weight of global economics like trade issues, that high household debt in Thailand. And the article really hammers home the need for caution, for careful strategy right now.
Exactly, and it shows the conversation is broadening, right? It's not
Yeah.
just about Phuket Central. You've got these other coastal areas emerging, helped by infrastructure plans, attracting people looking for something different, maybe quieter.
It really makes you wonder what truly defines resilience when a market faces this kind of complex pressure, both local and global.
It does. And you can't ignore that stark warning mentioned in the article, the possibility some experts see of a 20–30% value correction in Thai property overall by mid-2026 if things continue as they are.
Which brings us right back to the listener, to you. Thinking about everything we've discussed. You have this incredible history of Phuket always bouncing back, this proven resilience, but then you have these very clear present-day warnings about vulnerability, about potential sharp drops. So the question is, how much weight do you give that powerful historical track record versus the real risks outlined right now when you think about the future of this market, or frankly, any market facing similar kinds of pressures?
Yeah, definitely something to mull over after this deep dive into what this particular source had to say.